Welcome to the annual Los Alamos Legislative Preview. It is co-sponsored by the League of Women Voters and AAUW Los Alamos. Actually, I'm a member of both, but I'm representing AAUW tonight, and I am your moderator. I want to remind you that this meeting is being recorded so that those who could not attend can watch later. Since it is being recorded, if you do not want your picture to show, you should stop the video at this point. We have asked everyone to mute themselves except the speakers so that we eliminate background noise. We will be hearing from Representative Chandler, Senator Gonzalez, and Senator Jaramillo tonight. They each are allowed 15 minutes to tell us what they are looking forward to this session, any bills that they're introducing, and their hopes and expectations for the session. After the three have spoken, we will have a general Q&A session. If you have a question, you need to type it in the chat. Lynn Jones will be reading and monitoring that chat for me when that time comes. Each of the three representatives and senators will be allowed to answer each question. They will be given 2.5 minutes for each answer. And we have a Hill talker, Audrey C., who will be the timekeeper this evening. Anything else I needed to announce? I know that AAUW State, AUW is having their legislative day, advocacy day at the legislature on Monday, January 24th. And I think it's early February for League of Women Voters.
It's February 3rd.
February 3rd, okay. Thank you. For those people who want to know if you might be seeing some of us at the Capitol yet again.
Helena, you need to mention also that Kurt Steinhaus will be speaking following the legislators.
Yes, and it's good to see you again, Mr. Steinhaus, Dr. Steinhaus. And yes, after we hear from the three legislators and have a Q&A session, Kurt Steinhaus will be talking to us for about 20 minutes about what's happening with that Yazzie case. Many people are wondering, we hear in the news that the people responsible for that court case aren't happy. So we'll hear from Dr. Steinhaus in terms of how that's going. Any other business before we begin? Okay, then Christine Chandler, you're up for 15 minutes.
Great. Thank you, Helena. And it's really great to be here amongst my old friends from the League of Women Voters. I'm pleased to have been a longtime member and a former president of the local league chapter. So it's always great to be with you. I was thinking the other day when I realized this session was on January 6th, how appropriate it was really as we're thinking today about the attack on our democratic principles, on our democratic monuments, for us to be speaking together with an organization who has really been, the epitome of democratic principles. And I'm delighted that we are here talking about issues and talking about ways to move the state and the country forward in a positive way. So I just wanted to shout out to all of you because I know that you've all been working to make this state and the country a better place based on the principles of our Constitution. So now let's see, I got an email from Becky and she said, talk about your hopes and expectations for the session. I will do that. I just want to talk about a few mechanical things because I thought some of you would be interested. I know many of you come to the Roundhouse. there are some changes at the Roundhouse. Some are good in a sense, but also a little disappointing. A few months ago, we banned firearms in the Roundhouse. We passed a rule change, so members of the public will not be permitted to bring in their firearms, which occasionally they would do, particularly on days when we were talking about gun safety legislation. So as a consequence, there are now metal detectors in the Roundhouse, and I have to say I find that disappointing in a sense. We were one of the few state legislatures who were able to avoid that for a very long time, but that is no longer the case. Now also, I think you should know, with COVID still a very prominent item out in our world, we'll be asking members of the public to provide proof of vaccination status before you will be admitted into the area. I imagine there may be some other kinds of restrictions. Certainly mask wearing will be required by the health mandate. And I would expect that perhaps committee rooms, there may be some capacity limits placed on committee rooms. We don't want too many people in too close of proximity, just to follow, basic kind of health and safety standards of our day. So I thought that might be on your minds, and so I just wanted to share that with you. The House, however, and I can't speak for the Senate, and maybe some of the senators will speak to this, will allow virtual participation in committee hearings. So we're going to try to make that a continuing option. Many people found that helpful way to participate. So we're going to continue it regardless of the COVID situation. But legislators will be, in most cases, expected to attend the meetings and sessions live. Just wanted to share that with you before I get to my legislative agenda. I do have a little bit of an announcement to make. I was just made the chair of the House Taxation and Revenue Committee. So I will be, thank you. I will be focused the next 30 days, frankly, on learning how to be chair of a complicated and heavily watched committee. So that will be one of my legislative priorities, trying to get that down in a way that is fair to all the members, as well as inclusive of the public, and working closely with members of the public so they can participate as well. My legislative agenda will, maybe I should step back and review where we are. You all know this, I hope, but let's remember, this is a short session. It's a 30-day session. So what does that mean? That means the agenda of the session is limited to budget, appropriation, and revenue bills, constitutional amendments, and those items that the governor chooses to put on what we call the call or give a message. There are different ways of referring to it, but essentially, if your bill does not fall within the categories that I outlined earlier, you need a message from the governor. We know that certain bills are going to get messages, and I'll talk about those after I talk about what I'm planning on working on. And sometimes it's hard to get a message. I spend a lot of time calling staff members, as do probably my colleagues, trying to get the favorable ear of the governor's staff and department heads. My priority for the session is getting House Joint Resolution 1 passed. We filed that House Joint Resolution on Monday. I am co-sponsoring that bill with Representative Anthony Allison from the Navajo Nation. He lives over in the Four Corners area. It's a bill that is a repeat. Last year, I worked with Representative Allison on essentially the same constitutional amendment. We've tweaked it a little bit. What the constitutional amendment would do, if enacted by the voters, it would allow the state, it would create an exception to the anti-donation clause that would allow the state to provide more direct assistance to households to ensure that they have access to what we're calling essential household services. Household services are defined as internet energy, water, and wastewater. And what prompted this constitutional amendment last year was my work on the broadband bills that passed this last session. I was one of the co-sponsors on House Bill 10, which created the Broadband Council and a broadband fund and mechanisms for funding access to broadband and trying to accelerate the development of broadband infrastructure in the state. What we learned when we were interviewing people and talking with people is many state, the IT division and the transportation department and other departments in the state feel constrained in how direct they can be in supporting broadband development. Because the anti-donation clause prohibits state agencies and local governments from providing direct monetary or things of value to private individuals without some sort of, agreement or agreement for services and so on. Our state continues to be a very poor state, and there are many residents who cannot afford internet hookups, and really can't afford, even essential services such as, sewer hookups and electric hookups, etc. So this anti-donation clause amendment is intended to provide us a tool that we can use as we move forward to develop legislation that will assist us in assisting members of the public who need access. And it's intended to help facilitate the development of infrastructure across the state, particularly for those people who are in low income and who have not been able to do so yet. We did well with that bill last year. It got tangled up in the Senate, which I won't bore you with, but it passed the House and it passed 2 committees in the Senate. There was a problem when it made its way to the floor that I think we're going to have resolved. So I'm hopeful that we will be able to get it through, even though it's a 30-day session, not a 60-day, and it will take some lifting. But it's a very popular bill, and it appears to be gaining traction. AARP is very interested in the bill. Just got an email from FOG, Foundation for Open Government. The internet providers are interested in the bill because it will facilitate their working with the state in terms of developing broadband across the state and so on. So my hope is there will be a broad coalition of stakeholders interested in promoting that bill, and which will assist me and Representative Allison as we move forward on the bill. That is my priority in terms of legislation. I have a few other bills. I have a tax deduction bill that is intended to support large scale renewable energy storage. I have 2 labor related bills that are mostly technical fixes that I won't go into a lot of detail on, but they're intended to fill gaps in our state collective bargaining agreements, as well as something called the prevailing wage. And there are some gaps in those laws, and I've been approached by labor organizations to work with them on fixing those bills. I'm certain those 2 bills are going to get messages. So those bills will be considered and moved on. So that's pretty much what I'll be working on. Now, moving forward, what else will be on the agenda that we know about? What will be on the call, or what else is happening? Well, obviously, the budget is a very important thing. I won't talk a lot about that in detail. I know Senator Gonzalez is very familiar with it, and maybe he'll speak to that. But you're all probably hearing that we have a lot of money right now. I think last time I heard, and maybe the number is different now, but I think as of a week or so ago, it was 1.6 billion, and that's with a B as in Bob, more money than we had last year, above our last year's budget. And that is not counting the federal monies that we're getting from ARPA and, the other programs that have been enacted in the last 6 months or so in Congress. So it's a, in a way, it's a blessing and a curse because it's not a realistic amount of money, you know, so I really, in terms of sustainability, we know we are not going to be sustaining those kinds of surpluses. So the direction that I think most of us are looking at are investments in in infrastructure, you know, one-time or short-term expenses. It might include investments in improving the state's computer systems. Certainly, there's a lot of money going towards roads. We've put a lot of money into broadband, you know, proposals in the broadband fund, over $100 million in the broadband fund. I really feel we need to keep in mind that this is not going to last forever. And it's certainly the appropriators and Chairman Lundstrom is very cognizant of that and very mindful of being prudent. The goal is to keep very high reserves. Last I heard that was going to be set at around 30%, because we know we cannot count on those funds forever. And I would caution people to not be thinking in terms of long term. That is not sustainable for our future. And we must continue to be looking for ways to replace those revenues as we move forward. So that's what's going on there. We know there is going to be what people are referring to as a crime package. I've already seen 5 bills that Representative Ream has filed. Some I think I can support, some I'm likely not to support. There's the most controversial of his bills will likely be what they're calling the pretrial release conditions. It creates a presumption that people charged with certain crimes are likely to be dangerous to society and so on. And it shifts the burden of proof from the state to the defendant in terms of their ability to be released. And so that one will be looked at very, very carefully. What else is happening? The governor has proposed a 0.25% cut in our gross receipts, our state gross receipts tax. We'll be looking at that in the tax committee, of course. What else? I was trying to think of in terms of her agenda. I think there's going to be what people politely refer to as return to work legislation, or what others refer to as double dipping. There will be bills that will allow people who are retiring under para to come back after a short period of time, collect their retirement, and continue to collect the state salary. I think that has a potential for being controversial. And I actually did take up pretty much the 15 minutes, and I'm going to stop there. Thank you for the notice, and I'm looking forward to your questions. You guys always have great questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Chandler. There will be a Q&A session after the 2 senators speak. If you have questions, please type them into the chat. So Senator Gonzalez, you're up next. Is Senator Gonzalez muted? I can't hear him.
He is
There.
muted.
I'm okay now?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you again, Helena, and thank you to our listening audience, and thank you for the invitation. And also congratulations to Representative Chandler for her new endeavor of the lady chair of Tax and Rev. And that is a very important committee. You know, when I was in the House, I served in that committee for 16 years as the vice chairman, and I know the detail of work that goes in there, but, you know, congratulations. And I know that you'll do a really good job with that committee. What I'd like to do is give you a very brief, synopsis of, the Legislative Finance Committee. And the way this works is today we had the actual press release of the entire work that went in throughout the year. And what happens is immediately after the last day of the session, the new process starts for next year. It's a working committee that works, throughout the year. And we have a very, very dynamic staff that are very, into the research and to all the agencies, and they provide us with the feedback, the data, everything that is needed for us to move forward with a framework for the decisions that come up with. But I would like to say that, I'll be starting my 28th year, and we have never had a year like this year in terms of revenue. New Mexico is in a position that, we have never been in before. And to give you a little bit of a summary of this is just a few weeks ago, and we're talking about worldwide, the largest producing of oil and gas is Texas, it was Russia, and then New Mexico. Now, recently we have moved to number 2. This is in the world. And we have upgraded our rigs. These are the ones that do the drilling for the oil and gas. And we're at 94. And the highest level that we have ever been at 117 rigs. But with that is our production as today. We're producing 1.4 million barrels a day. And, this is something that New Mexico on the revenue, it builds our budget to at least a little bit over 1/3 of the entire budget that goes into the state. And this is what's given us those high levels, plus including the federal programs that was mentioned by Representative Chandler. So, we haven't been in this kind of position. But one of the parts that I would say is that I have seen through the years is we can't completely, open the floodgates. We have to be very careful. And there's 2 columns. We have recurring revenue that is expected to be there for the following year, and then the non-recurring. So the more we load into the column of the recurring, our chances is that we're going to have to start, that money has to be secured and has to be there. And it is correct. We're at the level of 30% on our reserves. The reason for that is that the number that we have has to match the reserves. And if we don't have the reserves, that has potential liability to our bonding capacity. So we don't want to lower our bonding capacity in any means. And our bonding capacity is what gives us strength also in the money that we do, or the funds that we do go after, when bonding projects are being done. So, we are in a position that we have never been before. And, that is really something for our state. Now, one part, and I won't go too much into education because we have Dr. Steinhaus that will be covering a lot of this, but there is absolutely no excuse to not have one of the most top programs in early childhood education in the nation, because we have built that fund to almost $500 million within the last 3 years. The funding is there now. As I mentioned to the individuals from higher education, if I was in your shoes, I would be jumping at what kind of programs we could build, what can we do, what can we work with to be top notch, into the training and just producing, the right elements, into having the component for early childhood. So that's a big plus. We talked about it for many years and we're there now. And this does not include that this coming year we'll be going with a constitutional amendment that will provide another 1%, from the land grant fund, into the funding for early childhood education. So that's a big plus for our state. We have talked about it. There's many, take the different parts and components that we're looking at early childhood, but it's there. The other one is that the position, as far as, that is that we really have to protect, is, our infrastructure. And we talk about infrastructure, that is, our to and from transportation. It's our utilities. We talk about broadband. it's a big picture. And, we're now to where we can really say, well, let's bring this in and let's just have that accountability statewide. So in those areas, we really see that there's a lot of federal dollars going into, and then there's also the general fund that we were going to be working with. And this is something that we were extremely deficient for many, many years. It was just like a little Band-Aid here and another one here, and we're finally seeing projects. Now, if as you travel throughout the state, you see a lot of road construction going on. That's extremely positive. There is momentum, there's jobs, there's opportunity, there's improvement to our system, and that's what we want to see. Now, two areas that I would I'm going to be working with, and one of them is throughout the years, and I've been working with this, probably I'm going to say about 6 years, is I really do want to bring the part of having our legislators to be compensation pay. We're the only state in the nation that does not receive compensation, and we're still operating under 1912. And it's a big gap, on today's cost of living and what it takes. And also being that the majority of our services has to be in Santa Fe, which is expensive. And throughout the years, I have seen, it really discriminates, because it discriminates in the fashion that you have to be retired, and there's nothing wrong with that, or you have to be wealthy, or you have to have a very good employer, to be able to serve. And it shouldn't be that way. It should be that you should allow, every person to have that opportunity. But being honest with what we have today is there's many individuals that can't afford it. And we have had in the past legislators elected, and after 2 or 3 terms, they leave because they can't afford it, to be there. And I really want to work with that. And it takes time, but that will have to be a constitutional amendment also. Now, one part that we will have to really look at very carefully is, I just want to take my, hat off to the Department of Transportation. They did one of the most amazing creative funding, bonding, that was done, that we were in a, prior to that, we were in such a debt, that, more about 30% of our funding for the DOT was going to pay debt services. And they came up with a part of the refinancing part. And this is with our bond structure. And we really need to look at every agency, that we have in our state with a complete structure, on our bonding, including our schools. It really doesn't make sense for everyone to be on their own, which if you're on your own, you're paying more because it's more cost. Then, we have the mechanism like New Mexico Finance Authority that can provide those kind of services. And we might need to have some expansion to that. I realize that. But, those are kind of things that will really bring savings. Now, New Mexico, to our structure, is we have the public retirement for state employees, and then we have the education retirement. We went in last year with a 1%, to put in a 1% increase to our education retirement. This year, we're looking at 2%, and then next year, another percent. And this is just to protect the fund and the liability that's there that is constitutional owed to this employees. Now, with education, the only 2 parts that I will talk, because we have Dr. Steinhaus, is really, where I see statewide, we have a big need for teacherage. And this is having living quarters for individuals that are within this district. So the more further out you go on the rural area, it's hard to recruit, it's hard to retain if you don't have adequate facilities for these individuals to live in. And this is one thing. Now, for years, you would say, well, we're talking about the rural area. Anymore, you take like Santa Fe, it's very expensive. You can't attract individuals to come and teach there, if they can't afford a place to live. So And we're finding out that, we have been really short on this. And hopefully this is another one of the strands that will help build in recruitment and more individuals going into education. Now, this is not one of my areas, but I have really been working with it all summer long. And we're in a position that we really have to dive in and help our hospitals. They're really at the seams, they're busting, and, from infrastructure, from capital outlay to the support staff to support and our medical doctors. And we had a real long, lengthy meeting yesterday. And, we're not going to get individuals to come to our state or to stay in our state if we don't make some changes to some very strong incentives. And one of them that we're looking at is loan forgiveness, because when you have individuals that come into that field and they have a very high debt for student loan, and a low salary, they're not going to stay. They'll go to where, they will be compensated at a higher level. So I will be working with that also. And then also watching from the investment pension, the entire funds for the state, how they're moving, how they're tracking, and, how can we best utilize this? One of the biggest challenges that we're going to have that we don't want to be caught on is we're having a lot of federal dollars coming into our state. And we really have to be really careful between federal dollars and our general fund. And we have to be very careful on the supplanting part. And we have to be very careful on the recurring and non-recurring, on what we're building with this. And right now, it's coming to us at such a fast pace that we really have to have a lot of technical assistance, throughout the state, to help water systems and everyone that's working with this federal dollars, that their intentions is good, but we have to make sure that it's being done right and that we work with that. And, with this, Madam Chair, I think that, I'll yield and, and I'll wait for it to see if there's any questions.
Thank you, Senator Gonzalez. Remind me what part of the Los Alamos County that you represent.
This is right on the part of, the southern part, where you have, it's a small portion towards the beginning of the municipality.
So does that mean that you represent me in White Rock?
Yes, that is
Okay.
correct.
Thank you.
And I have part of Rio Arriba and part of Santa Fe County, and then about 80% of Taos County.
Thank you. Again, I'm glad to see that some of you are typing questions into the chat, because after we hear from Senator Jaramillo, we will start going through some of those questions and answers. So Senator Jaramillo, if you unmute yourself, you can begin.
Thank you so much, Helena, and thank you, League of Women Voters Los Alamos. And I want to apologize if you hear me cough. I'm getting over a slight cold, so you're going to see that I'm not going to be as chatty as I typically am. I'm still a little under the weather, but I think we need to say happy birthday to one of the most special people. Well, it's not people, but the place that we know. A happy 110th birthday to our great state of New Mexico, and to all the residents who are in it. We truly live in the land of enchantment. So I couldn't let this evening go by without wishing our great state a happy 110th birthday. And so, just like my good friend, Representative Christine Chandler, I too am being elevated in the state Senate and am being made the vice chairman of the Senate Rules Committee.
Okay.
That will take place on the first day of the session. And although I'm going to be waiting for being the official vice chair, the work will start this coming week on Tuesday. We'll be meeting for a full week in the Roundhouse to discuss Senate rules and rules related to the public coming in, if the Senate will be doing a hybrid model when it comes to committees, and what we're anticipating will happen when it comes to the public participating when we're on the Senate floor. So I'm really excited excited to be joining my colleagues in the Senate Rules Committee, where there's leaders from both the minority party and of course the Democrat Party. And so coming together to create those rules and to also listen to the confirmations of people who have been set forth to sit on one of the boards from the governor's office. And so, like our friends have said, my friends Representative Chandler and Senator Gonzalez, we need to remember that first and foremost, this is a budget session. So we're looking at record revenues for the state, both from state gross receipt tax as well as federal funding. Now, a lot of that funding will be slated for critical infrastructure projects across the state. We all know how important it's going to be not only for internet when we talk about internet, but bridges, roads, senior centers, public libraries, and schools. We need to make sure that we get those fundings in the right place and that we're ready to execute. We'll work to appropriate nearly $1.1 billion in federal money reserved under the American Federal Rescue Plan Act, as well as our state's annual budget. So that's really exciting to know and to hear about the money that my friend Senator Gonzalez talks about that's coming into the state of New Mexico and the plans that we have set forth on executing projects and increasing budgets throughout state agencies. So I have the extraordinary opportunity to work together with everybody in the House and the Senate to advance the well-being of all of our children, New Mexican families and communities during this session. The better than expected revenues that we've all been talking about and the influx of that federal relief funding will allow greater investments in programs and services that will improve family economic security, make healthcare more affordable, and expand and improve birth to career education systems that helps our children succeed. And as a former educator, that's something that's very important to me. Bills that I'm going to be supporting that aren't mine, but bills that center around food security support to address child hunger and strengthen food security throughout the state of New Mexico. When I ran, I told you how housing was one of my major initiatives. So I'm going to be supporting bills, housing supports that including increasing and making reoccurring investments in the Housing Trust Fund, healthcare investments to ensure full funded of Medicaid, including enough to extend coverage of new moms for the current 2 months of a 12 moms postpartum, and the end of medical waivers and that waiting list. I'm going to be working on environmental health and climate action bills with my colleagues in the Senate and the House to secure stronger rules and regulations for capturing methane, improving utility affordability and energy efficiency in homes. Now, bills that I'm definitely going to sponsor is I want to bring back the gay panic bill. That's what I talked to you about, where somebody in a defense can claim they panicked, whether somebody made an advancement to them of the same sex and they didn't know this could mean either hurting them or killing them. They can use what's called the gay panic defense. And so that would bring that to an end. December 15th, we had those horrible winds that gust through New Mexico. During that time in rural Rio Arriba County, we had residents who rely on propane for heat. Some of those individuals only had 5% of their tank filled, and not being able to afford to purchase your tank means you lease a tank. When that happens, there's rules in place that won't allow a competitive propane company to go in and fill a leased tank from another company. I'm going to be looking at a way that I can introduce a bill that would remove these regulations in times of emergency to ensure that people who rely on propane for heat will be able to get their tanks filled when a company can't come in. I'm also working on a tax bill with the North Central Regional Transit District. Right now, the tax moves into Santa Fe County and is held there for a while before being moved to the Regional Transit District. By removing the middleman, in this case, I'm going to just say middleman for this sense, the tax would go directly into the RTD so that programs and buses or anything that tax is going to be used for can be used immediately. As a former educator, I'm excited that the Teachers Union has asked me to carry a memorial declaring January 31st the New Mexico National Board Certified Teachers Recognition Day. And so I'm really, looking forward to that. I'm looking forward to looking at all the other bills and reading them more in depth and working with my colleagues during the session. And just so everybody knows, the portion of Los Alamos County that I represent is Los Alamos proper, and I'm excited to be your voice in the Roundhouse. Thank you so much again for having me. I look forward to your questions and look forward to our discussion. And Dr. Steinhaus, so good to see you.
Thank you, Senator Jaramillo. At this point, Lynn will start reading the questions that are in the chat. So if I will not be calling on individuals to ask their question. If you have a question you want answered, you do need to type it in the chat. And Audrey C. from the Hill Talkers will be timing each of them that they only speak for 2.5 minutes. So Lynn, what is the first question?
Well, the first one is stated as food for poor people. So I guess that's asking what is being done with regard to providing food to poor in our state.
Okay, Representative Chandler, you may go first.
Thank you for the question. And truthfully, I don't have a good handle. I know that the governor announced additional monies to food pantries and so on. And I think I'm going to defer perhaps to Senator Gonzalez, who I view as our expert on the budget and funding issues, as you could tell from his very thoughtful and comprehensive discussion of what was going on there. But I do seem to recall that there have been increases in funds to various food providers across the state, but I'll defer to Senator Gonzalez in terms of the specifics on that.
Okay, very well, thank you. Within that, the analysis that has been done definitely shows a big deficit. And the exact amount is, we'll be having the hearings this coming week on both the Senate and on the House side. And the one that works with this is we provide the funding, and like North Central Economic Development, AAA, and we're aware of it, and we also know the need that is there, and definitely will receive an increase this year.
Thank you. Senator Jaramillo, you have anything to add?
You know, the governor did have a task force that does address child hunger and hunger actually throughout the state of New Mexico. So the task force will be making recommendations on what they think could help to alleviate child hunger and hunger for every New Mexican. So it's something that the governor is very passionate about and something that I'm passionate about. And I look forward to hearing the recommendations and seeing what we can do to support any initiative that would bring an end to hungry New Mexicans.
Thank you. Lynn, what's the next question?
Are there any plans to put some of this 1.6 billion into one or more of the permanent funds or to support EPA and PERA?
Senator Gonzalez, you're first.
Oh, yes, there is. You know, that is what I mentioned, that we started with education and retirement last year of 1%, and then this year in the budget already on the framework, there's a 2%, and then for the following year another percent, which brings it to the 4%. Now, you know, in seeing how our funds work, you know, this is just to keep being able with GASP, which is a federal requirement, you know, that we cannot have an operation of funds, you know, that would be a certain percentage level. So there is, and then there was throughout the years we have had a legislation that provides both for employee and employers to raise a higher contribution, and this is just to stay with the index of inflation and index of, you know, the consumer index.
Thank you. Senator Jaramillo.
I don't think there's too much more to add from what Senator Gonzalez said. So thank you for that, Senator.
Thank you. Representative Chandler.
I think part of the question was focused on, are we going to put a lump sum into the fund, if I'm understanding, into the funds? And I have not heard a proposal to do that at this point. And I know it's been raised at various points in time over the last year, but I don't know what the outcome has been on that. But I think that was Ed's question, and Ed, I'll find out for you and look into that further.
Very well, and I apologize for not referring to the first part of the question, but one of the, what I have been looking at for the last 5 years is the state of Wisconsin. They only have one fund, and that is for state employees, for education employees, everyone. And so when you have that, that is a lot easier, in my opinion, from what I've seen, to monitor. And at the same time, if you give a raise, well, it's all included in there. And this is one of the problems that we do have with our fund. For example, on the PRA by itself, the Public Employees Fund, has at least like 22 recipients, 22 beneficiaries, so from the judges to the courts to the state employees. So, and it would be a lot more, in my opinion, a benefit to the state if we were to concentrate on say one fund, or a lot less than what we have.
Thank you. Next question.
What is your assessment of the new redistricting maps and the process that got us there?
Senator Jaramillo, you're up first.
Thank you so much. I think that I want to first of all thank anyone who participated in any of the meetings leading to redistricting, to share your thoughts or your concerns. Those of you who sent letters in and emails in, I appreciate the time you took into writing and reaching out to us. And so I think that the final map that we got is one that was closest to the redistricting committee's map, and one that took into account our Native American communities. Our Pueblos and the Navajo Nation border Senate District 5, and there's 2 Pueblos actually in the district. So based on what their recommendations were and the recommendations of the committee, the map that did pass was one that closest reflected the work that both the Pueblos and the nation, Navajo Nation and Jicarilla Nation, along with the committee put together. It mirrored it closely. And I was a little bummed out that Los Alamos County wasn't one solid vote, but I'm more than happy to share it with Senator Gonzalez. And it's actually a good thing to have 2 voices in the Senate for one county. So you'll have 2 of us fighting for any type of initiatives that Los Alamos County is interested in, and we become a stronger voice when there's 2 of us advocating for Los Alamos. So for the most part, I think that when it comes to Senate District 5, it was a true reflection of our district, and I'm happy with the map.
Thank you. Representative Chandler?
I was happy with the process. I thought it worked. I thought the redistricting committee worked pretty well, and I felt that their process was very inclusive and accessible to members of the public, and they worked very hard to ensure that proposals were given due consideration. And there was I did sit in on towards the end and watch the deliberations of the committee in terms of how they came up with the 3 recommendations that they were required to make on each one of the positions that they were required to fill. So I was happy with that. I was happy with how the House conducted itself. We went in with the notion that we should look to the maps as the basis for our final proposal, and we did that. We only adjusted what we're calling the people's map at the end to account for the Native American input that had not been received at the time of the districting committees. And so I'm very happy, and I'm very happy with how my district came out in terms of compactness and so on.
Thank you. Audrey, each legislator gets 2.5 minutes. So it's not 2.5 minutes for all 3 comments. It's each one gets 2.5 minutes.
Okay, yes, ma'am. Thank you for clarifying.
Thank you. I could tell we're kind of shorting a few people on these comments, and so it's better for me to interrupt now. And so because Chris, I could tell you're starting to
Yeah,
talk
I was a little confused. I got a minute warning and I barely said 2 words, and I was like, What did I,
Yeah. Is this a
Okay, I
bad dream or
apologize. I thought it was
what?
2.5 for the whole thing. My bad.
So I'm really happy with, frankly, how our process worked in the House and how my District 43 came out, truthfully. So
Thank you. Senator Gonzalez?
Well, I guess in the Senate, we could write a short novel. It was interesting, but going back
a
to,
long novel.
okay, going back to, the late former Senator C.B. Trujillo and Representative Max Call, the late Max Call. I always remember their advice. This is my third redistricting that I go through. And, their words was, it doesn't matter how you look at it from day one to the last day, it's brutal. And what forces this is that, for 10 years, we're creatures of nature that we get used to our district and, we protect our district. And what you have to keep in mind that within those 10 years, what you're doing is readjusting, where you have growth, and you have readjusted where you have loss of growth. And then that brings, the balance and, and then also looking at the numbers, from the latest census, which is required from the very 10 years. So there is going to be change, no matter how you look at it. And it depends how it falls into the different parts of the state. But what's very interesting, it's a domino effect. You change from, say, one corner of the state, then the domino just goes all the way down to the last part of the state in the south part. And that's going to happen until you get that balance. So discussions and also input and the communities of interest, all this are very, very important. Now, unfortunately, the last two redistricting, which 10 years ago and 20 years ago, they have ended up in the courts. And, you always end up at the very end that, you're going to have a percentage of that are not happy with it. And it forces, into going to the decision that will be made, by the taking it to courts. So, we'll be fine. We'll work with it. That's what it is, because that's what the numbers are. And, we just have to respect that, that, this is where the numbers fall. And, once we have that, then that's what we work with for the next 10 years. But redistricting always brings change.
Thank you. Next question.
Will there be any bills on the call to support the governor's environmental goals as discussed at the climate summit that will turn the climate goals into climate action?
Representative Chandler, you're first.
Well, I have not seen any bills introduced at this point, nor have I heard of any being introduced, with one exception, and that's debatable. I think probably many of you have heard of the governor's initiative in terms of the hydrogen hub efforts. And I said that's debatable because I'm being inundated from various groups with various perspectives on that. Some do not believe it's an environmentally sound proposal. Others disagree and encourage us to look at the net effect and in terms of how you count it. So, but thus far, no, I have not seen any, and I have not seen any on the call. I would say one thing though, there is some interest in including in our bonding efforts, I think something called an outdoor sustainability. I can't quite articulate the name of it, but there's some discussion of using some of our bonding capacity to help with open space and other things. But short answer, not really. And the one thing that's happening of any consequence that I've heard of that's a big item is debatable in terms of its environmental impact.
Thank you. Anything on the Senate side, Senator Gonzalez?
What I see as a possibility is Senator Sevilla Lopez. She's working with a Green Amendment. And I know that she has, I think, approximately like 40 legislators that are signing into it. from both chambers. And so, that's not one of the areas that I work with, but, I foresee that there probably will be some legislation coming forward.
Thank you. Senator Jaramillo?
The only piece of legislation I know is the Green Amendment, which Cedillo Lopez has sent to me and asked me to read over. I haven't had a chance to do that yet, but I plan to do it leading into the session. So before I put my support behind anything, I make sure that I read up and see if there's any concerns I might have or any questions, but that's something I'm definitely going to be reading within the next week.
Thank you. Next question.
This might be a little repetitive, but I skipped a question. HJR 2, the Green Amendment, is a joint resolution to amend the Constitution in order to provide New Mexicans with environmental rights. Do you support or oppose HJR 2? Please explain your position.
Senator Gonzalez?
Yes, I do. In fact, I'm one of the ones that have signed up with Senator Cedillo Lopez, and also as Senator Jaramillo mentioned is, and this is not one of my areas, but I did have a lady that was assisting Senator Cedillo Lopez, and she spent a lot of time in going through a lot of information, her data, and the states that do have it, and what it's done, and also how bringing that protection to our future generations. So as I stated, I do support it.
Thank you. Senator Jaramillo?
This is the amendment that I'm definitely going to be reading this coming week before I make a decision if I'm going to be going full force or if there's any concerns or questions I'd like to have addressed. So I'm looking forward to reading up more on the Green Amendment.
Thank you. Representative Chandler?
I'm the wet blanket. And I'm putting my lawyer's hat on. I think people really need to look at that amendment very carefully. What it does is it creates the right and puts it into the New Mexico Bill of Rights. And what that does, it ties it then to a bill that we passed, or law that we passed last year, which is the New Mexico Civil Rights Act. And that was a very controversial bill. And what it does is it would allow individuals to sue through the Civil Rights Act to enforce what we're now calling the Green Amendment, but it's really an article of the Bill of Rights. That, Senator Jaramillo, when you read the Green Amendment, you need to then go read the Civil Rights Act, because they're coupled, and the Civil Rights Act creates the ability for the plaintiffs to obtain their attorney's fees paid. The Green Amendment does exclude damages, so it really would only be allowed to provide injunctive relief. But I am very concerned about the havoc that it could create and the unintended consequences without knowing what it's about. As far as I know, only 3 states have done something like this. So we don't have a lot to go on in terms of experience. But my concern is that it could be misused and abused in a way that would put things to a grinding halt, and that could be beneficial to a community. So, for example, there are many people who oppose nuclear power. Los Alamos County is involved in a nuclear power project in Idaho. I think under this, if this were to pass through the Civil Rights Act, individuals who believe nuclear power is harmful to our environment could use it to block Los Alamos County's participation in that small modular nuclear project, based on the impacts it allegedly has on an environment, in terms of creating waste and so on. Is that how we want our environmental positions to develop? I think the right approach is for the legislature to create environmental provisions.
Go on, Chris. Finish.
To create environmental provisions based on the public policy inputs that we have received from our citizens. I would also support a private right of action so that individuals have the ability to enforce the laws that the legislature have enacted. Representative Lewis last year introduced such a bill. And I think we need to continue down that path to allow, that would allow direct access to the courts for our citizens, but it would also provide a mechanism and some structure. So, that's how I'm approaching it. I'm very concerned that people don't fully understand the impact of the Green Amendment and how it will work.
Thank you. Do we have another question, Lynn?
Yes. Yes, this is more of a request. Please consider increasing appropriation for National Breast and Cervical Cancer Early Detection Program. Funding has remained flat for years. The program is only able to serve 15% of the people who are eligible to be assisted by this program. The number of people who need assistance from this program has increased substantially during the pandemic.
Do you have a response, Senator Harmio?
Anytime it comes to assisting programs that look into cancer, my dad died of cancer. And so when my father passed away, it's always been a passion of mine to ensure that we help New Mexicans who need testing or screening. And so that's something I would definitely stand behind and support.
Thank you. Representative Chandler?
Absolutely. I mean, 100% support the suggestion, and I'd like to see a way for us to try to move forward on it.
Thank you. Senator Gonzalez?
Oh, as we are today, within the framework, all agencies are receiving an increase. So now, how that is distributed within the agencies, that is their part, but every agency will see an increase. So there should be additional dollars to that.
Thank you. Do we have another question?
Yes. With all this money, why is the library budget cut? Books are necessary to feed the child's soul.
Representative Chandler?
Well, I didn't know the library budget was cut, so I'm going to point to Senator Gonzalez and ask him why.
Well, not to my knowledge that I know that they've been cut. In fact, we increased it tremendously. And also the tribal libraries and also state libraries, all of them are receiving an increase. But to my knowledge, I haven't, this is the first I hear of any libraries being cut. And I don't know if you're not talking about the distribution of the bonding, or the overall budget. Because what happens with the bonding part, it usually takes whatever was approved, say, for example, if it was approved this year, in some parts, it takes like 2 years to flow in.
Thank you. Senator Jaramillo?
Now, I do remember seeing something last night when I was reading over what it would look like in increasing budgets throughout the state of New Mexico, that I did see an increase to library budgets, including rural libraries. So I can say that I did see something last night on a line item that looked like there would be an increase in the budgets for libraries.
Thank you. Do we have another question?
If Representative Fajardo brings back HB 129, which is copay accumulator and prescription affordability, please support it. It died in committee last year after being passed by both the House and Senate.
Senator Gonzalez, do you have a response?
To be truthful, I'd have to go back and look at, the information on the legislation.
Okay, Senator Jaramillo?
I don't think I remember hearing this bill on the Senate floor, so I'm thinking it might have died in a House committee, maybe. I'm not too sure. It does sound like something I would stand behind, but I'd need to read about it. It's just not one bill that I remember debating on the Senate floor.
Thank you. Representative Chandler?
Same here. I don't remember the bill, but of course, if it is refiled, I'll definitely look closely. Frankly, in these last 3 years, we've done a lot to try to make healthcare more accessible. We've initiated measures to make access to the exchange and to lower the costs of premiums on our exchange and so on. So really, there's been a number of initiatives, mostly emanating from our House Health and Human Services Committee, where we have been doing things to improve the accessibility to affordable health care in the state, usually mostly through our exchange.
Thank you. Do we have another question?
Yes. Ed Birnbaum says, I am disturbed to read the plans to push hydrogen production from methane regardless of the color. The only thing that might make sense is pyrolysis, where you heat up methane in the absence of water and oxygen. Using water to make hydrogen makes no sense, especially when we are in extreme drought.
Senator Jaramillo?
I agree about using water, especially in a drought, when we're looking even at northern New Mexico and you look at our reserves in Abiquiu and Heron dams. They're really, really small, so we can't afford to be using our precious resource of water just yet, but I'll need to also look into, I do know that there's going to be something on hydrogen coming up. I want to read more into it, but I agree with you on using water for hydrogen.
Representative Chandler?
I agree to a point on the water. I would say this, I have looked into the issue of water used to create the hydrogen, and brackish water may be available as a source. And if brackish water is available and there's a way to make it economically feasible, I think that would be a win-win for all of us in terms of, there are areas of the state where there's quite a bit of brackish water that could be mined to support hydrogen. And I spoke to some of the lab experts, I don't know, a month ago. I've been trying to educate myself, frankly, on the hydrogen issue because I know it's coming up. And I did ask specifically about whether or not brackish water might be available, and was told it is something that could work.
Senator Gonzalez?
I'm pretty much, with my colleagues, of what they have stated, but I know that they have had, invitations, to provide some, information, and, maybe that's something that the three of us could do, is visit, the next time that they have an invitation, to where they're actually at the site. And that would be a very good opportunity to go into some real detailed questions.
Thank you. Next question.
There will be a bill calling for an independent redistricting commission. Will you support that joint resolution? Should it be a different process than was followed in 2021? It would be a constitutional amendment for 2024.
Representative Chandler?
I'll have to see what the amendment looks like and how the committees are appointed. There's politics everywhere. There's politics in how you appoint the commission. So I'm going to look carefully at it. I felt the process that we had in place worked very well this year. There were some bumps in the road, but in the House side, we were very, I think I would say there was fidelity to the process in terms of working with the commission recommendations and so on. There ultimately was fidelity in the Senate. And why was there fidelity in the Senate? And I'm not intending to criticize my two colleagues who are on the panel with me. There was fidelity in the Senate because the public was watching, they were actively participating, and when things seemed to be going off the rails, and there was a little period in there where it, at least from me watching what was going on, I wasn't participating, obviously, the people spoke up, and it was resolved. And as Senator Jaramillo pointed out, the ultimate resolution was to stay pretty close in line with what the recommendations were. So I thought that worked pretty well. We'll have to see what the amendment looks like, but the appointment process is going to interject politics. I think you all need to be, we all know that.
Senator Gonzalez?
Oh, I feel that we have to give the process an opportunity. This is the first time that we work with it. And of course, we're going to see as you mentioned, the hiccups that come with, with legislation as and also with any time that you have committees. But I feel that we could really extract and just really look at what worked and what didn't work, and then within the committee itself, can we fix this, or we might have to have some assistance, from the legislative part. But I think we need to give it more time and an opportunity, and then if it doesn't work at that time, then it's part to revisit, and not let it continue, if it's not working.
Thank you. Senator Jaramillo?
I agree with Senator Gonzalez that we need to look at lessons learned and then see a few years down the road what worked and then reassess on what didn't work. Now, the committee would be a great idea if you think of how a committee works, but you need to really understand what's the committee makeup and our voices of our Native people heard, communities of color. You need to really make sure that you have all these different voices coming together before you create a committee. So I agree with Representative Chandler that we need to look at the committee makeup before any decision is made to ensure that voices from every community are included when making a major decision in redistricting.
Thank you. We're going to take one more question, and then we'll let Dr. Steinhaus speak. If we didn't get to your question, after Dr. Steinhaus speaks, we'll have another Q&A session. At that point, we'll go revisit questions we didn't get to, and certainly you can ask questions for Dr. Steinhaus and any of the speakers at the second Q&A session. So Lynn, what's the last question we're going to look at right now?
Do you support the Health Security Act?
Dr. Gonzalez, Senator Gonzalez?
Okay, you can make me a doctor tonight.
I guess I heard the word health and I just couldn't help it.
Well, Lynn, yes, I do. And I have been the sponsor of that legislation for, maybe 6 years, along with the initial start with the late Senator Cisneros. But a couple of years ago was the first time, that through our junior monies, that we ended up funding the study to be done. And so we have that part, that gives us more information on, what the cost would be. But I have been one of the original sponsors of that. And yes, I do support it. I should sponsor.
Senator Jaramillo.
I have the opportunity to meet with so many people who support it, and so do I. And so it's nice that it's grassroots, allowing New Mexicans to set up their own health plan with their own freedom of choice of healthcare providers. That was something that I think is really important for New Mexicans, and it was something that I said I would support and would continue to support. It's like anything else that I've said, I'd like to see when bills come in that I really read into it and understand it before I give my 100% support. But based on what I know now and what I anticipate, it's something I would support.
Thank you. Representative Chandler?
It will depend on how Medicare is treated. And frankly, the bill has moved at various points in time. It's very hard for me to know where it is at this point in time. But there was a period of time when the bill had provisions that would allow Medicare to be, how do I want to say this? Medicare recipients and their benefits to be be included in the Health Security Act and have those benefits administered through the state plan. And that caused, frankly, a great deal of consternation amongst our constituents in Los Alamos. I certainly got feedback. I'm seeing Maury nodding, and Maury was one of the individuals who brought this up as a concern. I think it's a very, very legitimate concern. People are generally happy with participating in Medicare, and they are concerned, and rightfully so, in how it will be treated should the state choose to include that as part of the provisions. I mean, there are administrative issues associated with that. It would have to be approved through the federal agencies and so on and so forth. But I have raised this on a number of occasions with the activists, with the proponents of the, the advocates who've been working the bill. And frankly, as of a couple of years ago, it hasn't been resolved. The study may address it, and I haven't seen the outcomes of the study, but I am concerned about its impact on Medicare. And I would recommend that all of you, inform yourselves on that, because it is an important provision that I think often gets overlooked. So I thank you, Maury, and others for bringing that to my attention when I was first elected. Thank you.
Thank
May
you.
I add
Thank
a
you.
little bit more? Is that okay?
I'm sorry, Senator.
No, I just wanted to have one
yeah.
more comment. I think that it's really for our, for Senator Jaramillo and myself, that this time we have we have Dr. and Senator Martin Hickey in the Senate, and he has just been a wealth of information. I mean, he has grassroots, he's been in the trenches, he really knows how this works. And that is, he's a very good resource, that is really going to be very strong for us in working and assisting us with keeping us in the right direction. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, those who submitted these very thoughtful questions. And as I said, if we didn't get to your question, we have another Q&A session after Dr. Steinhaus speaks. Audrey, he gets 20 minutes. We requested Dr. Steinhaus to come and talk to us about what the Department of Education has planned to address the Yazzie Martinez case. So Dr. Steinhaus, you're on.
Well, good evening, everybody. It's great to be here. Don't you just love the League of Women Voters in the AUW? They do. I think we should give them a round of applause. They play such an important role, and thank you. And thanks for inviting me to come tonight. I really look forward to talking about one of the very important issues in education in New Mexico, which is Yazzie Martinez and the budget connected to that. But before I jump into that, I also have to share, as a member of the Los Alamos community and as a school superintendent, I couldn't have asked for 3 better representatives in the New Mexico legislature. Our 2 senators and Representative Chandler, those of you that don't know, supported education. They were accessible, not only during this session, but during the interim. If I had questions or things I wanted resolved, Representative Chandler, she was on the phone talking to that cabinet secretary, getting them straightened out. And so I just wanted to recognize how wonderful it is to have great leadership. If it's okay, I'd like to share my screen and share a couple of slides. Would that be okay?
Yes, it would.
Okay. Can you see a slide now?
Yes, I can. I
Okay.
hope everyone else can.
Okay, so what I'd like to do in answering your question, and I can keep it to the time limit, is to start out with some big concepts and then move to some big budget numbers. And I'd like to start as a school district superintendent, because it wasn't very long ago that was my job. And as a school district superintendent, I owned the ruling in Yazzie Martinez. I knew that was my responsibility. And so I invited attorneys from the Center for Law and Poverty to come to Los Alamos and speak to us and share with us the summary of what Judge Singleton said and what our expectations were. And then we rolled up our sleeves as a school district, created an equity council, started disaggregating the data by the 4 subgroups that are in the Martinez-Yazzie. And so that's an important thing for all of us to remember is this is an adequacy lawsuit for adequacy of funding for our schools. And then it covers 4 subgroups. Students who are experiencing poverty in their family is one. Another subgroup is English language learners. Another subgroup is students who have IEPs and have been receiving special education services and ancillary services. And the fourth subgroup is Native Americans. So that's at the very highest level, that's what the Martinez-Shazi lawsuit is all about. And what you have on this slide here is kind of the four big categories that I see as outcomes. The first one is closing the opportunity gaps, and I list these in order that are impeding equitable student success. The second one is just increasing student achievement. The third one is graduating students from high school who are ready to either go to work or go to college or just be successful in life. And then we do have, and we have had across the country and also New Mexico, pervasive disparities between the subgroups. And a part of this ruling from Judge Singleton is to address those and close the gap between those disparities. On the next slide, you'll see what I've picked out to be what I think are the 6 levers that we have either as a legislator or an education secretary or a governor or a school superintendent to address the ruling in Martinez-Shazi. And the first one is increased funding, and I'll talk about that in a few minutes here. But we also need to make better use of the funds we've got, implementing research-based initiatives, not just grabbing the flavor of the month, but finding things that work. And that includes looking at other states and finding what's working in other states. Another one is the monitoring and oversight. That's one of the levers that is important in addressing the Martinez-Shazi ruling. We need to evaluate the programs and keep the ones that are working going and get rid of the ones that aren't working, and coordinating access to resources across state government. So the Public Education Department is the lead agency on addressing Martinez-Shazi. But I have worked since I started just 3 months ago and gotten to know my counterparts in the early childhood area, the higher education area, and in the Indian Education Division. So it's a combined effort, and probably the most important thing I'd like to say about this, about me personally, is when I attended the press conference when the governor asked me to serve in this role as Secretary of Education. That was a Thursday. That first weekend, this was so important. I spent that entire weekend working on the first steps of writing a plan to address Martinez-Shazi, and then presented it the next week, the very early draft, at a government meeting with tribal leaders, governors and presidents, and got some pretty good feedback about what that plan really needs to include. And we've rolled up our sleeves from that. And then what I've got after that is a slide that describes the details of how we're going to close the opportunity gaps. Here's the different strategies that we've built in. And when we get to the Q&A part, I'd be happy to answer questions about that. How are we going to increase student achievement? Here's a list of the 5 areas that we have in place that we're working on in that area. Graduation rates is something we're working very hard with the Higher Education Department. In fact, tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock, Secretary Rodriguez, the Higher Ed Secretary, and I are presenting here in Los Alamos for Leadership Los Alamos, and we'll be talking about these categories. In eliminating the disparities, we are looking at all 4 subgroups that I mentioned before. And I've had, even though I've only been on the job a few months, I've had the opportunity to travel across New Mexico and meet with many tribal governors, and I've met with the presidents of Navajo Nation and Jicarilla Apache Pueblo and their tribal councils, and gotten information from them about how they would like to address Martinez-Shazi. So that's just a real quick overview. And then the last slide I have here on this part of it is some boxes that represent the long-term PED strategic plan. And this plan is done and it's ready to go. And the 4 boxes, educator ecosystem, the purple, the green, profiles and pathways, the other green, supports, and then the orange, whole child. Those are the 4 main categories in our strategic plan. And then in the middle, the yellow box is the systems that we need to get that implemented. And with that, I'm hoping I've got a couple more minutes. Is that true? Okay. What
Yes,
I'd
you
like
have
to
11
do
minutes.
now, what's that? What'd you say, Audrey?
You still have 11 minutes, sorry.
Okay, all right. So what I'd like to do here is move quickly to work with you and share with you some big numbers. So these big numbers represent what I presented this morning to the Legislative Education Study Committee. We call it our public school support package. And you take this package along with the Legislative Education Study Committee's recommendations and the Senate Finance Committee recommendations. And starting Monday, we'll have a different sheet and you'll be able to see the differences. And I'm excited. This is, of all the years I've worked with the legislature in education, this year there's more congruence and more similarities across all those agencies than I've ever seen before. And that's good news because it's a 30-day session. So I've got about 4 slides here. This is a slide with the big budget references to addressing unfinished learning. And the most expensive one and the biggest one here is providing additional time to have students engage with their teachers. And if I learned anything from this pandemic last year as a superintendent, is our kids need to be in school and they need to be with their teachers, but they also need to be with their friends and learning. We've got a big literacy initiative with a $10 million increase. Mathematics. This year, our proposal is to focus on algebra, which is a gatekeeper for students in middle school. Increasing career technical education is something that I think most of New Mexicans are realizing is exceptionally important for our high school students. And we've got some examples in New Mexico that are going well, and we want to build on that. And then behavioral health. What this talks about here is addressing suicide ideation, cutting, depression, all of the things that we've seen increase during the pandemic. So that's one bucket. Here's another bucket of money, again, to address the Martinez-Shazi lawsuit and move New Mexico forward. We're asking for about $15 additional million to flow through the Indian Education Act. Community schools have proven to be extremely helpful, especially in addressing families that are experiencing the impact of poverty. And we've got good schools we want to continue, but we want to expand that in New Mexico. All of this is to address Martinez-Shazi. Instructional technology, getting the computers into the hands of kids has worked pretty well. The thing we're working on right now, which is also a part of a second ruling, we call it the tech order. This is a part of Martinez-Shazi, is to get internet connectivity to every single student's home. And I'm happy to report that we've made tremendous progress on that and we're moving forward. Improving education for English learners and for students receiving special education services. So those are all a part of it. This is my last slide, and this is by far the biggest pot of money. And the idea here is to raise the minimum salaries for teachers. We have 3 levels of license, 1, 2, and 3. So that's why you have a minimum salary of 50, 60, and 70. And then retaining our teachers by a 7% increase. But this is not just for teachers. This request to the legislature is for every single employee in the school. So school psychologists, custodians, instructional assistants, bus drivers, principals. This proposal is to provide an increase for all of those people. And then there's another thing that goes on in New Mexico, It's an agreement that we have with tribal governments for native language teachers, and they have a 520 certificate, and we would like them to get paid the same amount as teachers. And if we do a good job as a state, we'll be able to be competitive regionally with our neighbors in Arizona, Colorado, Utah, Oklahoma, and Texas. And that was a very quick run through. And Audrey, how close am I in my time?
You have 6 minutes and 30 seconds.
Okay. With that, I'd like to turn those 6 minutes back to move to the question and answer, because I'm guessing some people will have some questions, and along with our distinguished elected officials, I'm happy to do my best. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Steinhaus. At this point, I don't think we have any questions for you, but if you do have questions for Dr. Steinhaus, now's the time to type them in. And Lynn, do we have any unanswered questions from the previous session?
Yes. This is from Becky Shankland. Senator Gonzalez, thanks for beginning the difficult task of trying to get a constitutional amendment begun to allow legislators to receive salaries. Do you have Republican support?
Senator Gonzalez?
There, I was muted. Oh, it's we probably would have to, in the past, there has been not so much support from the Republican, but I think that they're seeing as time goes on that the need is there and recognizing that, and hopefully that, we can work with that. One of the parts that we did have on the constitutional amendment is that it would be a third party that would be doing the base of the salaries. So it's not like we would be creating our own or within house that we would be doing. It would be a third party. And, I think that that was positive, but we do have to work more on it to have their support.
Senator Jaramillo?
It's always interesting on conversations when it comes to paying legislators on the take different people have. And so it would be interesting to work. I've built some relationships with the Republican senators to see what their take would be. But I would hope that they would agree that this would help to bring different voices into the roundhouse when we are able to pay legislators who might not be able to afford to run without being a paid senator or member of the House.
Representative Chandler?
I certainly support having compensation for our legislators, and the rationale from my perspective is it will allow a greater access for people to run. As Senator Gonzalez pointed out when he was talking about this effort, many of us are retired or have some independent means of sustaining ourselves, but it's harder on the younger members in our body to be able to balance the family, and also many have to continue to have their jobs and so on. So that part I definitely support. I also would like to point out, I think it goes beyond salary. We need to look at the length of our session. I think this is what we should be talking about, is a modernization of our legislature and bringing it into line with the kinds of issues we receive, the importance of the issues, the complexity of the issues that we have to consider. I think also we need staff assigned to us, for some amount of staff. People are surprised. I get emails saying, I haven't heard from either you or your staff. and I think it's me, myself, and I, and I've got about 100 emails here, and I'm doing my best. But so just imagine me, and I'm retired. You all know that. But if you've got a day job, it's how are you going to deal with this? So I think we need support that goes beyond just salary. If you want us to rely less on lobbyists for information, or advocates. God bless the advocates. They're very good also, but they also have a point of view that colors the information we receive. We need staff to help us do the research. Not everyone has the time to go digging around for days on end to try to understand, for example, blue hydrogen, green hydrogen, gray hydrogen, what's the project? That takes a lot of time to really understand. So thanks for the question, and Becky, and it's a pretty broad and important issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Lynn, I see maybe two questions related to the internet that are addressed to Dr. Steinhaus, but maybe you can combine those, because I think the legislators might want to respond to those questions as well.
Okay, I think this one might get it all. It's to Dr. Steinhaus. Representative Chandler described a joint resolution to allow direct subsidies to families for internet connections. Is that necessary for getting broadband to student homes, or do the schools have other ways of helping families with internet costs?
Would you like me to go first, Representative Chandler? Or do you want-
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. If I understand the question, the answer is yes. The resolution that she's talking about is necessary to meet the challenge we have in getting internet to families, but it's a very complicated question. So in addition to what Representative Chandler is talking about, we have to work across all of our sovereign nations in New Mexico to get permission to pull fiber. That's, I think, a little bit different than the anti-donation clause issue. And there are also 3 pots of federal money that our working group is accessing. One of them is an emergency broadband fund. And I'm really happy to report that New Mexico twice, there's been 2 application processes for this emergency broadband fund, and we've been 3rd in the country in applying for that. And a part of that is the outreach that this group has been giving. I think it's Washington, D.C. and the state of Hawaii were number 1 and 2, and we were number 3. So it's a complicated issue. We've got a very good working group addressing it, and we do welcome the resolution that Representative Chandler is proposing.
Okay, Representative Chandler.
Thanks for the question. I think I have repeatedly heard from the Department of IT that the anti-donation clause has really been an impediment in terms of their ability to provide direct financial assistance for connections and the like. And there are federal monies coming in, which I think will help alleviate that to some degree, but this is a long-term issue. I'd also point out, in dealing with the Department of Transportation, they have a lot of rights of way, and the providers, we could facilitate access to those rights of way by addressing the anti-donation clause as well. The Department of Transportation takes the position that they have to charge fairly high fees to get access to those rights of way. And if we could adjust that so that it's easier for providers to get access to them through this clause, I think that would help as well in terms of facilitating build out of internet services.
Senator Jaramillo.
Completely agree with Representative Chandler, because this is going to be major to the success of not only to students in New Mexico, but to businesses coming into New Mexico. So what the pandemic taught us is that we need to depend more on a virtual world, on connecting more through internet. We need to make sure that we can not only connect cities to internet, small towns, but rural New Mexicans are in need of internet. So I completely agree with Representative Chandler, and have heard actually about the anti-donation clause as one of the major roadblocks when it came to ensuring that we had internet provided to our students when the pandemic hit. So I look forward to working with my colleagues on finding solutions and supporting initiatives regarding internet.
Senator Gonzalez.
What I was going to mention to the league is, I would highly recommend that you could have Mr. Luis Reyes from Taos. He's the Kit Carson Electric Co-op CEO, and he has done an outstanding job, to ensure, that especially in education, that every student has the opportunity, to the internet. And it's just a wonderful part of one individual within the community, that just really stretching out and just really working. And he's done amazing. And, I would really ask you that you might want to listen to him at some time. If you want to have a meeting, I would be more than glad to set it up and help you with that. But it's very interesting because he's a master at working at obstacles. He really is good at negotiating, and it's good at bringing this, but also what he has done for the community. That would be, part of my, but, I know that we do have challenges within the state, but he's someone that can really work through those barriers.
Thank you. Do we have another question for Dr. Steinhaus?
see.
Meredith Machen asked, oh, I'm sorry.
Lynn, sorry, do you mind if we jump back to the internet just for 30 seconds?
Sure.
I also wanted to mention that as many of us know that our public television, PBS, is an incredible infrastructure across New Mexico, and they have volunteered to work with us to use that infrastructure to get connectivity to the students.
Cool.
And then you might have seen an article in the paper last week. I received approval for an emergency procurement, and we got money for 900 families to receive a little satellite receiver box. And we're trying in 900 families an opportunity to receive the internet through satellites and to see if that'll work. And we think it's going to work. We do see some examples of it being used in Utah. And so that's why I said it's complicated, because there's lots of different ways to get to this. And this emergency procurement, Representative Chandler did not interfere with the anti-donation clause. So we were okay with that one.
Is Cuba, if I can ask a question, sorry guys, I don't want to hijack your meeting, but is Cuba doing this as well? Or is that a different program,
Yes.
Doctor?
Cuba is a part of this pilot project, yes.
Great.
And actually, I'm glad that you interjected that, because that has been a concern, that we have 26,000 students in New Mexico who don't have internet access. And this emergency appropriation only helps 900. But hearing that it's a pilot to see if it actually will work softens that blow a bit. We are scheduled to leave at 8:30. So I'm going to let Lynn decide what question to ask next, and we may not go in order to try to get at things that will cover most of our interests.
Okay, we may not get to them all, but there's one that might be quick. Does getting internet service also include students getting computers?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. That was a nice short answer.
Okay. Okay. And then from Meredith Machen, Dr. Steinhaus, please send your slides to Barbara Califf. Thanks for your work. Please explain which budget requests are in HB2 and which ones are in separate bills and have these been endorsed by the LESC.
Let's see. All of the budget items I presented to you this evening are proposed to be in House Bill 2. And of course, that's the legislature's decision. And LESC does not endorse proposals from the Education Department, but I can tell you that we are very, very closely aligned. LESC's budget numbers are a little bit higher than ours, but the basic concepts and the programs are the same.
Thank you.
And one more question for Dr. Steinhaus. Is there resistance to the items in your education agenda from Native Americans due to the perception that it will change their lifestyle?
Yeah, thank you for asking. The proposals that we have for funding for the Indian Education Act are not mine. They came from tribal leadership. So just the opposite, we have support from our tribal leaders for the proposal.
Thank you. Next question, Lynn?
Yes, since UNM and UNMLA require all students to be vaccinated unless there's a medical or religious perhaps exemption, why are not high school students who attend UNMLA required to be vaccinated as well?
I have no idea if any of these panelists are able to answer that question. But since Dr. Steinhaus used to be our superintendent, I'll let him try.
I appreciate that question, and I've asked the same question, and the answer that I've received is that the high schools are following guidance from the Department of Health, and the universities set their own requirements. And that's why there's a little bit of a difference there.
Because, you know, I have a personal question around that in terms of, I have seen that our two largest universities, New Mexico State and the main campus at UNM, require staff and students to be vaccinated and boosted. Yet some of our smaller universities around the state are giving the choice of being vaccinated or being tested weekly. So this is for anyone on our panel. How come that can happen?
Well, I'll take a shot, and they have different governing bodies. I mean, and frankly, I don't think the governor can even tell the regents what policies they're going to apply to their students. It's the regents, for example, that have determined how they're going to govern the activities of the students and their staff and so on and so forth. So I think that's how that happens, is they have different governing bodies who've chosen to adopt different policies.
Thank you. Lynn, do we have another question?
Yes, this is back to our legislators. Do you support reduction of interest rates on small same-day loans to 36%?
Senator Jaramillo?
Absolutely. It's something I supported last 60-day session, and it's something I would support again.
Senator Gonzalez?
Most definite, I would support it, and in my opinion, even 36 is too much.
Representative Chandler?
Yes.
Well, that got us around fast. Do we have another question?
I'm actually looking through them, and I believe that we have covered them all.
So can I, well, it's not a question so much, but it's a point about the 36%.
Well,
Is
I
it-
think at this point, if we don't have other questions,
Okay, all
we
right.
can give each of our panelists 3 minutes to closing remarks. So, go ahead, Representative Chandler.
I'll just, it's not exactly a closing remark, but the question I would pose, and I know people aren't going to answer because there are about 50 of you on the line, but if there's a bill that modifies the bill that the Senate sends over, should we support the bill if it has a tiered approach, or should we just say no and leave it at the 176% for all loans? Those are the kind, I'm highlighting that because those are the kinds of decisions that we are asked to make.
How
Things
about
are not often up or down votes on a particular item, but bills get modified as they proceed. We do not all control the committee processes through which the bills go through. So let's say the Senate bill, which may be the bill that people have been talking about most recently, is at 36%. It makes its way to the House and it's modified, and there's a tiered approach where some level of loans are 36%, some level of loans are higher. That's the choice we're asked to make. Which is better? I just want to show that's an example of the kinds of issues and how we have to make decisions. And often those nuanced decisions are not well explained in the press, and people are led to believe that someone who votes for that bill or against that bill wants the interest rate to stay at 76%. So I'm just saying, be aware of how we have to sort through items. And so I guess that's an appropriate closing statement.
Well, and
in
I
a
think
sense.
we can ask your question and we can ask people to hit the reaction by raising their hand or raising their actual hand if they
Yeah.
can figure out where the reaction is.
Is it all or
Yes.
nothing? That's what I want to know. All or nothing. We get the whole enchilada now, or do we get some of the enchilada?
So if you say it has, if you are in agreement that a legislature should support if they could get some of what we want, raise your hand.
Okay.
It's-
That's
I
helpful.
know you have
That's
to
really
probably
helpful.
scroll because there are 2 screens worth of people, but does that help you?
Yeah, it does. And I think it was a good example of the kind of perplexing things we have to deal with sometimes, you know.
Yes. And you know, it was a nice way for us to be a little bit interactive here tonight. Anything else you'd like to say to us in closing?
I just want to say it's been a pleasure to have 2 senators who care about Los Alamos as much as I do. And it's been really enjoyable experience working with both Senator Jaramillo and Senator Gonzalez. It really has. And they are interested in, and they prepare, and they're thoughtful people, and they're kind people. And I know that they care about all the residents of the state of New Mexico, and most particularly, of course, their districts. So thank you, gentlemen. The best is yet to come.
Thank you. Senator Gonzalez, do you have a few minutes of closing?
Sure. First of all, again, thank you. And in my part, always keeping, keeping this in mind is the position belongs to you. It's not mine. I represent you, and the capital belongs to you, the same, and we have had some trying times of what we're doing with COVID, and we'll might even see more, and I know that with Dr. Steinhaus, some very tough decisions have to be made. But, first and most is the safety, and also, what is the best interest to keep everyone safe as we're going through this. And then on the other side, just looking at all the issues that are facing us, and we have big issues. We have some very positive things that are happening in our state, but also we have areas that we definitely have to focus some attention to. And this is where we come in. But I just want to say that for the number of years that I have been there, this is a very challenging one in many ways, but, some very positive results can come out of this also. And I think, I don't remember if we mentioned this at the beginning, but we're going into a $8.46 billion budget this year. And that is a growth of, almost, I think it's like 14% from prior years. So a lot of careful planning. And again, just looking at every part, that affects our state, but getting back, to jobs, and getting back to, having that good results for our state in many ways, and also protecting our natural resources, and also, our keeping our students in our state. We put a lot of money into this, and we should keep the brightest of the brightest in our state. So that comes with having some good jobs and good opportunities for our students. And also, as we address all ages of the population. But thank you again for the invitation.
Thank you. You have some closing remarks, Senator Jaramillo?
Yes, thank you so much, Helen. Thank you so much to the League of Women's Voters Los Alamos. It's always a pleasure to meet with you and the residents of Los Alamos County. And I echo what Representative Chandler said. It's an honor and a privilege to work alongside two people I don't only consider as my colleagues, but I think of as my friends. And I'm thankful to serve in the Capitol with them. And I've said this before and I've said again, I am a senator in large part because of Dr. Steinhaus, who served as one of my mentors when I was a new hire at Los Alamos National Laboratory. And so I'm very thankful that he served in that educator role as a mentor and as a manager at Los Alamos. So I'm forever thankful for everything you taught me, Dr. Steinhaus. And I'm happy now to consider you a colleague again. And I'm so happy that you're leading the state when it comes to education. And I'm looking forward to continue to work on issues and on policies that will help New Mexicans at every level. I'm a strong advocate for students and for teachers, and I'm going to continue to do that. You know, I've told all of you this story before that I was raised in poverty. So working to help those students and families who are seeing themselves in downtimes and how I can help them out and serve as a voice, because I've lived those experiences and serve my real life experiences on that Senate floor, something that I'm very fortunate to do. And so thank you so much again. I do have to say, Audrey C., thank you so much for this. I love seeing the next generation joining in and being part of the process. And you have been voted the best background by me. And so I think I'm going to need your help to help me with my background soon. So I look forward to seeing all of you soon. Please reach out to me if you need anything.
Thank you. Do you have some closing remarks, Dr. Steinhaus?
Sure, thank you. Just a couple. I'm appreciative to the League and AAUW for this opportunity tonight. And I will say one more time that we are honored to have outstanding elected officials. And the truth with Senator Jaramillo is I worked really hard to get him to be part of my team because he was such a good employee there at Los Alamos. Tomorrow morning, when school starts in New Mexico, the sobering news is that we will be short 1,000 classrooms without a licensed teacher. And to address Martinez Yazzie, I need your help to implement a statewide initiative. And we've got a proposal to the legislature, and we're doing work right now to meet that workforce crisis across New Mexico. So I wanted to put that on the table as something that's really important. The second thing that, or maybe the last thing I'd like to say is that what's in the Martinez Yazzie ruling is the right thing to do for students in New Mexico. And so that's what motivates me. When the governor asked me to do this Secretary of Education thing, I said, I'll do it on one condition, that I'd be allowed to make decisions that are best for students. And this Martinez Yazzie ruling and the work to address it is what's best for all students in New Mexico. And so I just ask for your help in addressing this, because it's big enough and hard enough that we all need to work together. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for everyone who phoned in. And thank you to the League for inviting our 4 speakers. Thank you for the time of the 4 speakers to prepare. And you never know what questions we're going to ask. So, you know, your willingness to put up with us and not knowing what we're going to ask you is always wonderful. Thank you to Audrey, the Los Alamos Hill Talker, for being our timekeeper. We really do depend on you to keep us focused and on time. Again, a reminder that AAUW will be having their advocacy day at the Capitol, if we're allowed to get in there, on January 24th. And the League will be doing the same thing on February 3rd. I've been happy to moderate tonight. I guess I have to ask Barbara if there's anything else the League needs to announce before I close this meeting.
Thank you. No, we don't have any other announcements at this time.
Okay, so whoever is responsible for closing out the meeting, thank you all, and have a pleasant evening.
Thank you.